Sylvester Stallone felt the small hand tug at the back of his jacket for the third time in 2 blocks, and when he spun around, the same barefoot little girl stood there clutching a crumpled photograph against her chest. He pulled away and quickened his pace, but every time he glanced over his shoulder, she was still there, running to keep up, her eyes locked on him like he was the last person on earth who could save her. What happened in the next 45 minutes would become Hollywood legend, a story whispered about for decades. This was outside a restaurant in Philadelphia, November 2016. Stallone had just finished dinner with 2 producers. He was walking toward a black SUV when he felt the tug. He looked down. A girl, maybe 8 years old, brown hair tangled, coat 2 sizes too big, shoes held together with duct tape. She stared up at him with eyes that weren't starstruck. They were desperate. And what happened in the next 48 hours would become Philadelphia legend, a story whispered about for decades. But we need to start at the beginning. Stallone's bodyguard, a thick-necked guy named Dom, stepped forward immediately. He put his hand on the girl's shoulder and said, "Hey, sweetheart, you gotta let go." The girl didn't flinch, didn't blink. She just kept holding that jacket sleeve and looking up at Stallone's face. Dom looked back at Stallone for instruction. Stallone held up his palm. "Wait." He crouched down, one knee on the cold sidewalk, and brought his face level with hers. "You okay?" he asked. She shook her head. "No." "Where are your parents?" She pointed down the street, not at a person, not at a car, just down the street into the dark toward nothing Stallone could see. Now here's the thing about Stallone that most people don't understand. He's not playing a tough guy. He grew up in Hell's Kitchen, New York, in a household that could charitably be described as chaos. His parents divorced when he was young. He spent time in foster care. He knows what desperation looks like because he wore it on his own face for years. So when he looked at this girl, he didn't see a fan, he didn't see a nuisance. He saw a version of something familiar, and his jaw tightened. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sophia," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Sophia, I'm Sly. Tell me what you need." She opened her mouth and closed it, then opened it again. "My mom is sick, really sick. She's in the hospital and nobody will help us. I heard you help people. I've been waiting here for 3 hours. Believe me, that sentence hit differently in person than it reads on a screen. 3 hours. An 8-year-old girl standing on a Philadelphia sidewalk in November for 3 hours waiting for a movie star she'd somehow learned was eating at this specific restaurant. Stallone looked at Dom. Dom looked at the ground. Nobody knew what to say. Stallone stood up but didn't let go of the girl's hand. He turned to the producers behind him and said, "I need a minute." One of them, a guy named Richard, started to say something about a schedule. Stallone's eyes cut to him and Richard stopped talking mid-syllable. "Trust me on this. When Stallone gives you that look, you stop talking." He walked the girl over to a bench near the restaurant entrance. The valet guys were watching. A couple of fans across the street had their phones out. Stallone sat down next to Sophia and said, "Start from the beginning." And she did. Sophia's mother, a woman named Elena Vargas, had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder 11 months earlier. The condition was attacking her organs slowly, methodically, and the treatments available at their local hospital weren't working. There was a specialist at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore who could help, a doctor running an experimental treatment program. But Elena had no insurance that covered it. She'd applied to 3 different medical assistance programs and been denied each time. The bills from her current treatment had already eaten through everything the family had. Sophia's father had left 2 years before. No siblings, no extended family in the country. It was just Sophia and her mom was running out of time. Now get this. Sophia hadn't just stumbled onto Stallone randomly. The girl had done research. Actual research. She'd gone to the public library after school, used the computers there, and tracked Stallone's visit to Philadelphia through entertainment news sites and social media posts from the restaurant. She'd taken 2 buses by herself to get to this street. 8 years old. 2 buses. In the dark. Stallone listened to the whole story without interrupting. His right hand was resting on his knee, and as Sophia talked, his fingers slowly curled into a fist. Not anger. Something else. Something deeper. When she finished, the sidewalk was quiet. Dom stood a few feet away, arms crossed, looking at the sky because looking at Sophia was going to break him. Stallone pulled out his phone. He didn't dial anybody. He handed it to Dom and said, "Get me the name of that doctor at Hopkins, the one running the autoimmune trial." Dom took the phone and walked away, already searching. Stallone looked back at Sophia. "You took 2 buses to get here?" She nodded. "By yourself?" Another nod. Does your mom know you're here? Sophia's face crumpled just slightly around the edges. She's too sick to know where I am right now. Mrs. Gutierrez next door is watching me. She thinks I'm at the library. Stallone leaned back on the bench. He rubbed his face with both hands. Here was a guy worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a guy who'd played the toughest characters in movie history, and an 8-year-old girl in a too-big coat had just brought him to a full stop. Okay, he said. Okay, Sophia, here's what's going to happen. We're going to get your mom help. But first, I need to get you home safe. That's step 1. Everything else is step 2. Deal? Sophia stared at him. Then she stuck out her hand, tiny and cold, for a handshake. Stallone took it. They shook once. I swear this happened. A multi-million-dollar handshake on a cold bench in Philadelphia between a movie legend and a kid whose shoes were held together with tape. Stallone had Dom drive Sophia home. He went with her. The SUV pulled up to a narrow row house in a part of Philadelphia where the streetlights worked every other block. Mrs. Gutierrez, a stout woman in her 60s, opened the door looking frantic. She'd figured out Sophia wasn't at the library about 20 minutes earlier and had been calling everyone she knew. When she saw Stallone standing on her neighbor's porch, she made the sign of the cross and said something in Spanish that roughly translated to, "God has lost his mind." Stallone explained the situation. He was brief. He told Mrs. Gutierrez that Sophia was safe, that he was going to look into Elena's medical situation, and that he needed the name of Elena's current doctor. Mrs. Gutierrez, still half convinced she was hallucinating, gave him everything he asked for. Stallone wrote it all down on the back of a restaurant receipt with a pen he borrowed from Dom. Before he left, he crouched down in front of Sophia one more time. I'm going to make some calls tonight. Tomorrow, someone from my team is going to come by and talk to you and Mrs. Gutierrez. You did something incredibly brave, but don't you ever take 2 buses alone in the dark again, you hear me? Sophia nodded. Then she said, Are you really Rocky? Stallone let out a sound that was half laugh, half something that caught in his throat. Some days, he said, some days I try to be. He stood up and walked back to the SUV. Dom was leaning against the door. He'd been in the security business for 15 years, worked with athletes, politicians, CEOs. He later said in an interview that he'd never seen Stallone move with that kind of urgency. Not on a film set. Not before a premiere. Not ever. Here's what nobody tells you about Stallone. Behind the action hero persona, the guy runs a network. He knows people in entertainment, sure, but he also knows people in philanthropy, in medicine, in law. Years of charity work, hospital visits, and foundation involvement had given him a contact list that most nonprofit directors would trade a kidney for. And that night, sitting in the back of the SUV heading to his hotel, he started making calls. The first call went to a friend at the Sly Stallone Foundation. He described Elena's situation. Within an hour, his team had identified the specific program at Johns Hopkins and the doctor running it, a specialist named Dr. Catherine Hale. The second call went to a personal contact at the hospital's administration. Stallone didn't ask for special treatment exactly, but when a name that big calls at 10 o'clock at night, people tend to answer and they tend to act. By midnight, Dr. Hale's office had been flagged about Elena's case. The third call was the one that mattered most, and for real, this is where the story turns. Stallone called Elena's current doctor at the local hospital, a guy named Dr. Nazir. He got the answering service. He left a message. 20 minutes later, Dr. Nazir called back. He was stunned to be talking to Stallone, obviously, but he was also a physician who cared about his patient, and when Stallone asked him for a candid assessment, Dr. Nazir gave him one. Elena was deteriorating. The autoimmune disorder was moving faster than their treatments could manage. Without access to the experimental protocol at Hopkins, Dr. Nazir estimated she had 4 to 6 months, maybe less. The experimental treatment wasn't guaranteed, but it was the only realistic shot. What's stopping it? Stallone asked. Money, Dr. Nazir said. Pure and simple. The program costs about $90,000 out of pocket if you're not covered. She's been denied by every assistance program because of technicalities in her paperwork. Immigration-adjacent complications. She's here legally, but the system keeps finding reasons to say no. Stallone went quiet on the line. Dr. Nazir said later that the silence lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt longer. Then Stallone said 5 words, "That's not going to work." By the next morning, Stallone had set 3 things in motion. First, he personally committed to covering Elena's treatment costs. All of it. The $90,000 plus whatever transportation, housing, and follow-up would be required. Second, he had his foundation's legal team reach out to the assistance programs that had denied Elena to challenge the paperwork issues. Third, he arranged for a private medical transport to move Elena from her local hospital to Johns Hopkins when the time came. And then he did something nobody expected. He went to the hospital to visit Elena himself. This wasn't a photo op. He didn't bring cameras. He didn't bring press. He brought Dom and a bag of groceries for Mrs. Gutierrez, who'd been feeding Sofia out of her own kitchen for months. Listen to me carefully. There were no paparazzi shots of this visit because Stallone entered through a service entrance. The only reason we know about it at all is because a nurse on the floor recognized him and later talked about it in a local news interview, and because Sofia eventually told the story herself years later. Elena was in a shared room on the third floor. She was thin. Her skin had that grayish pallor that comes from months of being sick under fluorescent lights, and she was hooked up to an IV drip. When Stallone walked in, she didn't recognize him at first. Her eyes were cloudy from medication. Sofia was sitting in a chair next to the bed, holding her mother's hand. When Elena finally focused and realized who was standing in her hospital room, she tried to sit up. Stallone crossed the room in 2 steps and gently pressed her shoulder back down. "Don't get up," he said. "I came to you." Elena looked at Sofia. Sofia looked at the floor. It was pretty clear that Elena had just learned what her daughter had done. And on that face, sick as she was, 3 emotions fought for control at once. Fear that her daughter had been in danger, confusion about why this man was here, and something that might have been the first flicker of hope she'd felt in months. "Your daughter," Stallone said, pulling a chair up to the bedside, "is the toughest person I've ever met, and I've worked with some tough people." Elena's eyes filled. She gripped Sofia's hand tighter. Stallone laid it out for her. The treatment at Hopkins, the costs covered, the legal team working on her paperwork, all of it. He spoke plainly, no drama, no grand speeches. "This is what's happening. This is the timeline. These are the people who are going to call you." He left his personal assistant's phone number on the bedside table. And then he did the thing that broke the story wide open, emotionally speaking. He reached into his jacket pocket, the same jacket Sofia had grabbed on the street, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old, creased so many times the edges were soft. He unfolded it and held it up. It was a rejection letter. From a studio. Dated 1975. The letter told Silvester, Stallone, that his script for Rocky was not commercially viable and the studio was passing. Now you need to understand what this means. In 1975, Stallone was broke. He was so broke he sold his dog because he couldn't afford to feed it. He was sleeping in a bus station. He had a script he believed in and nobody else did. He received rejection after rejection. That letter was one of them, and he'd kept it for over 40 years. He held it up so Elena could see it, and then he looked at Sofia. "You know how many people told me no," he said. "You know how many doors got shut in my face? They told me I talked funny, told me I looked wrong, told me nobody would watch my movie. I had every reason to quit, but I had this." He tapped the letter. "I kept this because it reminded me that somebody else's no doesn't get to be my answer." He folded the letter back up, and then, you won't believe this, he handed it to Sofia. "This is yours now," he said. "Whenever somebody tells you no, whenever the world tells you it can't be done, you look at this letter, and you remember that the guy who wrote Rocky was told Rocky wasn't worth making, and then you go do the thing anyway." Sofia took the letter with both hands. She held it against her chest. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Stallone stood up. He looked at Elena. He looked at Sofia. His eyes were wet. "I'm not adding that for drama." Multiple people confirmed it. Silvester Stallone, Rocky Balboa, Rambo, the guy who punched Dolph Lundgren 200 times on screen, stood in a hospital room in Philadelphia and cried. Not sobbing, not theatrical, just tears rolling down a face that had been carved by decades of both real and fictional fights. He wiped them with the back of his hand, nodded once at Elena, and walked out of the room. Dom was waiting in the hallway. Dom said Stallone didn't speak for the entire elevator ride down. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at the floor numbers ticking by. This is the part of the story where things actually started moving. And they moved fast. Within a week, Elena was transferred to Johns Hopkins. Dr. Hale reviewed her case and accepted her into the experimental program. The treatment was aggressive, a combination of targeted immunosuppressants and a new biological therapy that was showing promise in early trials. The first 2 weeks were brutal. Elena got worse before she got better. There were days when the medical team wasn't sure she'd stabilize. Sophia stayed with Mrs. Gutierrez back in Philadelphia. A social worker from Stallone's foundation checked in on them every other day. Stallone himself called Sophia once a week, every single week. I want you to sit with that for a second. This is a man who was simultaneously filming a movie, managing a business empire, and dealing with his own family obligations. And every week, he picked up the phone and called an 8-year-old girl to tell her that her mom was fighting and that fighting was what mattered. During one of those calls, Sophia asked him a question that Stallone later said nearly broke him all over again. "Mr. Sly, what if my mom doesn't get better?" Stallone was on set. He was in costume. There were 50 crew members within earshot. He turned away from all of them, walked to a corner of the soundstage and said, "Then we deal with that together. But we're not there yet, and I don't quit on people, Sophia. That's not how this works." One crew member who overheard the call said Stallone's voice was steady but his free hand was shaking. That's toughness, not the absence of fear, the refusal to let it drive. 6 weeks into treatment, the first good news arrived. Elena's blood work showed improvement. The autoimmune markers were declining. Dr. Hale called it encouraging, not a miracle, not a cure, but a direction, a trajectory that pointed toward life instead of away from it. By the 3rd month, Elena was strong enough to walk the hospital corridors. By the 4th month, she was eating solid food again and her color was coming back. By month 5, Dr. Hale used a word that nobody had dared use before: remission. Partial remission, with caveats and qualifications and a long road of follow-up treatment. But remission. When Sophia got the call, she screamed so loud that Mrs. Gutierrez dropped a pot of rice on her kitchen floor. Here's the part that makes this more than a celebrity charity story. Here's what separates this from every other feel-good headline you scroll past and forget. Stallone didn't stop. He didn't write a check and vanish. He didn't do a press conference and move on. After Elena was discharged from Hopkins, Stallone's foundation set her up with continued care, a caseworker, and financial support for the transition period. They helped her navigate the legal paperwork that had been blocking her from assistance programs. They connected her with a patient advocacy group that would handle her case going forward. And they set up an education fund for Sophia. An education fund for a kid whose shoes were held together with tape. But wait. Cross my heart, it gets better. About a year after that night on the sidewalk, Stallone was back in Philadelphia for a charity event. A big gala, black ties, chandeliers, the whole production. Halfway through the evening, the MC announced a special guest. The room turned toward the entrance. Elena Vargas walked in under her own power. She was wearing a blue dress. Her hair was done. She was thin, yes, still recovering, but she was standing, she was healthy, and she was alive. Sophia was next to her, wearing new shoes, holding her mother's hand. The room went quiet. Stallone was at a table near the front. He saw them. He pushed his chair back and stood up. He didn't wave. He didn't pose. He walked straight to them, moving through the crowd, and when he reached Elena, she grabbed both of his hands and said, "You saved my life." Stallone shook his head. "No, she did." He pointed at Sophia. "She saved your life. I just answered the phone." Mark my words, that line landed on that ballroom floor and everybody felt it, because it was true. The whole thing, every bit of it, started because a little girl refused to accept that her mother was going to die. She researched. She planned. She took 2 buses in the dark. She grabbed a stranger's jacket and wouldn't let go. Sophia looked up at Stallone and said, "I still have your letter." Stallone dropped to one knee in a tuxedo on a ballroom floor in front of 300 people. "Good," he said. "Never lose it. This right here, this moment is why I tell these stories. This is why this channel exists. If this one hit you the way it hit me, do me a favor and smash that subscribe button. We find these stories, the ones nobody else is telling, and we bring them to you every single week. Hit subscribe. Hit the bell. Be here for the next one. Now let me finish this." Sophia Vargas grew up. That tends to happen with kids, even kids who take 2 buses in the dark. She graduated high school near the top of her class. The education fund Stallone set up helped, but it was more than money. It was proof that someone believed she was worth investing in. She went on to study pre-med at Temple University. Pre-med. The kid who couldn't afford shoes decided she was going to become a doctor. And Elena stayed in remission. The experimental treatment held. The follow-up care kept her stable. She went back to work part-time, then full-time. She never fully regained all her strength, but she gained back her life, and she watched her daughter grow up. That's the thing that matters. She was there for the graduations, the birthdays, the arguments about curfew, the mundane, beautiful, ordinary stuff that almost got taken away. Stallone kept in touch. Not every week anymore, but regularly. Birthday cards, occasional calls. When Sophia got her acceptance letter to Temple, Stallone sent her a framed copy with a handwritten note on the back. Nobody outside the family knows exactly what the note said, but Sophia once told an interviewer that she keeps it next to the rejection letter from 1975. The no that launched Rocky and the yes that launched her. You know what strikes me most about this whole thing? It's not the money. $90,000 is a fortune to most people, but it's a rounding error in Stallone's world. It's not the fame connection or the access to the right doctors or even the happy ending. It's the bench. It's the fact that Stallone sat down on a cold bench on a Philadelphia sidewalk and listened. He could have smiled, signed an autograph, told Dom to handle it, and gotten in his SUV. Nobody would have blamed him. Nobody would have known. The girl would have gone home on 2 buses, and her mother would have continued dying, and the system would have continued failing, and nothing would have changed. But he sat down. He asked her name. He said, "Start from the beginning," and everything changed. That's what makes a legend. Not the muscles, not the movies, not the money, the willingness to stop when stopping is inconvenient, to listen when listening costs you something, and to act when acting is entirely optional. Sophia once said in an interview, and this is the last thing I'll leave you with because it's the only ending this story deserves. She said, "Everyone knows Silvester Stallone as Rocky, but Rocky is a character. What he did for my family, that's not a character. That's just a man who decided that a little girl on a sidewalk mattered, and I spent my whole life after that trying to be worthy of that decision." She's a doctor now, by the way. Finished her residency in 2027 at the same hospital where her mother almost died. She specializes in autoimmune disorders. No script in Hollywood could write that. Stallone was once asked about that night in Philadelphia during a podcast interview. The host brought it up casually, as a sidebar. Stallone got quiet for a moment. He looked down at his hands. Then he said the quietest, most powerful thing I've ever heard a man that famous say. She didn't need Rocky. She needed someone to sit down. 7 words. He didn't explain them. He didn't expand. He just let them sit there, and then he changed the subject. That's the legend, not the one on screen, the one on a bench, the one that started with a little girl grabbing a jacket sleeve and ended with a life saved, a future built, and a rejection letter passed from one fighter to another. Philadelphia has a statue of Rocky at the bottom of those famous museum steps. Millions of tourists take photos with it every year. They pump their fists. They hum the theme song. They pretend to be the fighter who never gave up. But the real Rocky moment in Philadelphia didn't happen on those steps. It happened on a sidewalk, in the cold, in the dark, between a man who had every reason to keep walking and a girl who had every reason to give up. Neither one of them did. And that, right there, is how legends actually get built.